Welcome to the AT Parenting Survival Podcast, where you get help and guidance through the chaos of parenting a child with anxiety or OCD. This show is for educational purposes and is not intended to replace the guidance of a qualified professional. Here's your host, child therapist, Natasha Daniels.
Well, hello there, and welcome to another episode of the AT Parenting Survival Podcast. Today, we're going to dive into moral OCD. I have quite a few episodes on moral OCD, but I wanted to do another one. One, because it's such a common problem that's not covered enough. If you're a parent raising a child with moral OCD, you're nodding right now because this is true. And two, from the 2 decades I was an anxiety and OCD child therapist and my ongoing work in the AT parenting community, helping like thousands of parents, I see common mistakes over and over again, in particular with moral OCD. So I thought, what a great topic to cover to make sure that you avoid these common mistakes. But before I get started, I do want to thank NoCD for sponsoring this episode. NoCD offers affordable, effective, convenient therapy, and they're available in the US and outside the US. You can schedule your free 15-minute consultation to see if NoCD is the right fit for you and your child. Just go to treatmyocd.com. That is treatmyocd.com. I will leave a link in the show notes as well. So let's dive into today's topic. So I just want to briefly, for those of you that are new to my podcast and new to OCD in general, what is OCD? I'm just going to talk about this, but I do have other episodes on what is OCD. We dive more deeply on just like the fundamentals of it. And I will leave a link to all of my other moral OCD podcasts. And I have some YouTube videos too on that. But in general, moral OCD is having an intrusive thought or feeling that you are going to do something bad, that you're going to turn into something bad, or that you've done something bad. And I have to say it that way because it's different for each person who has moral OCD. The general theme is, I don't want to be a bad person. That's like, and I might have done something bad, or I might do something bad, or I have done something bad. So it can show up in lots of different ways. And the compulsions around moral OCD can involve lots of different things. And like I said before, OCD is so different for each person that it can look different in each person. You can have people who are seeking constant reassurance from you. Sometimes our kids are confessing behaviors, looking for reassurance in that way, or just having someone witness them confessing. They might mentally review or verbally review with you things from the past or things that have happened in their day. They might excessively apologize or ask permission for things. That's a common one. They might check if you're mad at them compulsively. I've even seen where hand washing is part of moral OCD, where they had a bad thought and they have to wash their hands, or they touch someone who their OCD says is bad and they have to wash their hands. Sometimes moral OCD will pair up with contamination OCD and make a person who is quote unquote bad the contaminated ground zero. And then they have kind of two themes merged as one. So some of that may sound familiar to you. And the core fear that's driving moral OCD, again, is different for each kid, but there are some common ones. When moral OCD is called religious OCD, the core fear is around God. And OCD loves to hijack what we care about, what's important. And so God and religion are not off limits to OCD. In fact, that's a great opportunity for OCD, sadly. And so the core fear that I might go to hell is a common one. The core fear that I'm going to disappoint God. But normally, if you go down the rabbit hole with that, if you disappoint God, then you're going to go to hell. So normally, but then sometimes the core fear around hell is different. Some people are worried about the physical pain of hell. Some people are worried about being separated from their family. Some people are worried about not being in heaven with their family. So you can see that you really need to go way down that rabbit hole to find the core fear. If you are wondering, how do I find the core fear, or the core fear confuses me, I do have a very helpful workshop on how to find understanding the core fear and how to find the core fear. And you can check that out at natashadaniels.com/core fear. Just want to mention that since we're talking a lot about core fear right now. Other common core fears, and moral OCD can be called scrupulosity OCD, like I said, religious OCD and moral OCD, because that belief system doesn't have to be centered around God. It could be I'm going to be a bad person and I'm going to disappoint my family and I'm going to be alienated and all by myself. I'm going to be rejected. It could be fear of the law, that I'm going to do something bad and I'm going to get accused of something I didn't do and I'm going to be locked away or put in prison. And so, moral OCD, the core fear of moral OCD can be different for each person. But today, I want to go into the mistakes that we often make that are easily avoided, but that are super common with moral OCD. So, we're going to first talk about the pitfalls. These are like the common ones I'm going to break through. They're not exhaustive. Obviously, there could be more, but we're going to just talk about the most common ones I see in the AT parenting community and in the 2 decades when I was in my private practice. And then after the break, we're going to talk about how do we handle the things that I'm talking about so that you can avoid doing them? Or if you are doing them, which a lot of us probably are, how can you pivot and do something different? So let's dive into this. All right. So there are 5 of them. That's actually a nice number. 5 mistakes parents often make. I like that. Okay. Mistake number 1. This is a common one, is that you think that your child has good morals. And so initially, and if you're really early into this or you're not sure your child has moral OCD, I see this at the very beginning of the journey with moral OCD. Initially, moral OCD is not spotted because parents are just like, I have the most conscientious, caring, morally sound kid I've ever met. And I'm not saying that that's not true, because in reality, OCD is opportunistic and it will hook into themes that would really upset a person. So if a person really cares about being a good person, that's a great theme to target a person who cares. And so they do tend to be very kind-hearted, good people. But having intrusive thoughts about being a good person versus just being an authentically good person are 2 completely different things. So when you see excessive apologizing and you're thinking, oh my gosh, my child is so polite, they care so much, or excessive thank yous. I noticed that with my son. And really, moral OCD is just this like tiny little flavor that he has operating in the background. It's never been his front burner issue. RFID, avoidant restrictive food intake disorder, is his number one issue. Probably tying that is his ADHD and his social anxiety. Those are like the 3 front burner. But moral OCD like just rears its ugly head periodically. And because it's not a front burner issue, I've missed it often. I'm trying to think of my right words. And one of those was that he would always just be like, thank you, you know, thank you for dinner. Thank you for taking me here. And finally, I realized that he wasn't just this overly polite kid when he was like, thank you for taking me to the doctor. Thank you for taking me to get my blood work. And I'm like, okay, this kid doesn't want to go to the doctor or blood work. And he's not appreciative that I'm taking him. What is going on? So don't mix intrusive thoughts around something or behaviors that are compulsions. Don't, 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 I'm trying to think of the right thing. Don't look at those as good behavior or good morals, or because when it's driven by OCD, it has nothing to do with that. That makes sense, right? All right. Pitfall number 2. And when we go and break down these things, we're going to talk about, well, I could talk about it now. The reason why that's not helpful is because you miss OCD. You see it as a positive. And then sometimes on the flip side, parents think if I remove that and we work on their moral OCD, then they're going to be disrespectful, rude, impolite kids. And that is not what's going to happen, because it's apples to oranges. Like my child saying thank you when I'm taking him to the doctor hasn't changed whether he says thank you when I get him lunch or I do something nice. It's just that he's not saying thank you when I take him to the doctor anymore, because that was compulsive. Okay, pitfall number 2. When you think you're having a real conversation versus you're talking to OCD. And we're going to get into the weeds of this. There's kind of in my 5 points, the next one and the next one after that are somewhat related to this. So there's this really like a 3-parter. This is a big one. This one is an issue for all parents who are raising kids with OCD, but in particular, moral OCD. Because you know when you're talking to your child's OCD most of the time when it is obvious and it's like contamination OCD. When they're like, did you wash your hands? Did you touch that? And then did you wash your hands? Or if they're like, I touched the Clorox wipes and then I touched my lips. Is this bad? Is it poison? Like that kind of sticks out as OCD. But when it's moral OCD and they start off like, hey, my friends were talking today and they were gossiping about our friend that was sick. And I was sitting there and I didn't say anything. Does that mean that I'm a bad person too? Because was I kind of gossiping because I didn't stick up for her? Well, that sounds like a really genuine conversation. And it is a real situation. And that's where moral OCD hooks you in because you think you're having a real conversation. And really, that's OCD talking. That's moral OCD seeking reassurance from you, replaying a situation and wanting confirmation they're not a bad person. And it's hard when you are in the middle of raising a little person and you want to teach them right from wrong, good from bad, moral versus immoral behavior. And moral OCD just muddies the waters because you can't do it when you're not talking to your child. You can't do it in the moment when you're talking to your child's OCD. On a separate note, but kind of a parallel note, just to help show you what I'm talking about, my youngest daughter has depersonalization, derealization, and it's got an OCD flair to it. And I initially assumed I was talking to her when she would say things like, what if none of us are real? Or, the universe is so big and we're so insignificant and it's like nothing matters. There's no point. And so I'm like, oh my gosh, she's depressed. And I swoop in with my conversation of everything matters. Life has a purpose. And I'm starting to talk philosophical with her. And I see this glazed look of panic and distraction. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm not having a conversation with her. We're not having a philosophical conversation. I am talking to her anxiety and OCD right now. And one way that I've learned that the hard way is the more I talk about it, the more she spins out of control and the more the conversation goes south because I'm talking to her anxiety and OCD and not her. And that happens a lot with moral OCD because they will present to you a real problem, but it's not them who wants to process it. It's OCD. And after the break, we're going to talk about how to break this down. But I just want to go through all of the pitfalls first. Okay, so the third one, which is related to this, actually, yeah, it's the third one. I was just making sure like what number we're on. This is related to that. And that is when you respond to their confessions as if it is real or their story as if it was real. And so I'll give you a really black and white one that's not as hard to figure out. Child with moral OCD gets intrusive thoughts, and they have this intrusive thought that says, my mom is fat. And OCD says, ooh, that's a horrible thought. You need to tell her that. You need to tell her that you had that thought. So you're not lying to her or holding it in. You're being transparent. Common thing with OCD. So then the child says, Mom, I'm sorry, but in my head, I thought you were fat. And then you respond as if your child legitimately needed to tell you that. And so you respond with whatever you're going to respond with. Maybe you say, well, that's rude. You don't have to say that to me. Or maybe you respond with some reassurance. Well, that's okay. A thought is just a thought. Or maybe you respond with, you can have lots of thoughts. You can think it, but not say it. So more of a lecture thing. It doesn't matter how you respond because you responded as if it was a real conversation instead of literally an OCD compulsion coming out of your child's mouth. And so it's funny. I remember I was in session and this girl, she kept interrupting my session and she was with her mom. So it was like me, her mom, and her. And she would say, I'm sorry, Miss Natasha, but I think you're really old. And it's kind of hard not to take it personally. I mean, it's an intrusive thought. And then same girl would come in and say, "I'm sorry, Miss Natasha." And I always knew, so I like brace myself. She's like, I'm having some thoughts that you're fat. And it would just always be insults like, "You're fat, you're ugly, you're old." And I just had to have this poker face and just be like, "Tell your OCD they're not part of this session." And it is hard, just, sideline. It is hard because it's hard not to take those things personally when your child is saying stuff about you. Sometimes the confessions are, "I'm sorry, mom, but I don't think I love you." That's a hard one too, because it's hard not to get hit in the gut with that. But learning to separate it out and recognize these are common OCD things can help minimize that personalization of these insults. For me, it was just the initial like, "Oh, her OCD's telling her that, but then she must have that thought in her head somewhere." That's my insecurity was like, "Okay, I'm fat and old, whatever. We already know that. Let's move on." But try not to respond to them when, and we're going to talk about this after the break as far as we're going to get into the nitty-gritty of how to not do these things. The next one is that once you learn that part of what we're going to be talking about after the break is not talking to OCD. We're not going to answer OCD in the way that OCD wants to be answered. That doesn't mean that we go radio silent and do not speak to our kids when they're struggling. And I've noticed that some people who just grab a little bit about what I say, but they don't absorb the whole thing, a little bit of knowledge and not the full knowledge is a dangerous thing. And they'll say things like, "My child was saying all these things to me, and I just sat there in silence." They're like, "Why are you not talking to me?" It doesn't mean you literally don't talk to their OCD. And we're going to talk about some better responses so that you don't grow OCD. One of the struggles that I hear a lot of members from the AT parenting community say is, if I don't talk to them when they're struggling, then my child won't talk to me. There's two things that I hear. My child won't talk to me, and they're going to bottle it up and they won't be able to get it out. Those are two different concerns around the same issue, which is pulling back your involvement in answering OCD, not providing the reassurance, not having long winded conversations with OCD and not your child. And I want to break, I'm going to talk about each one specifically. So, worried that your child isn't going to come to you. So, if you're always shutting down their fears and their concerns, then what if they never talk to you again? That's one of them. And the other one is, if they're not being able to let it out with me, then they're going to just be struggling alone with these thoughts. And that feels cruel and not fair to my child. Okay, we're going to break down the myths after the break, but these are some pitfalls because then the child is like, not the child, then you, the parent, is reticent to do the things that are evidence based, which is to not talk to the OCD and grow it bigger, and due to those fears. So we have to address those fears in order for you to do the evidence based therapeutic approaches that OCD therapists are going to teach you to do if they're a trained OCD therapist, which is to not grow OCD by not engaging with OCD. So we'll debunk that in a minute. The next one and the last one, and this is a big one for moral OCD, is you confuse your child's religious beliefs, or if they're not religious, or an and or their personal preferences, like caring for the environment, clean eating, worrying about recycling, things that quote unquote good people do. You confuse those beliefs with OCD. And so a lot of times, and this can happen at the beginning, or it can happen to parents who are just not connected to a community that educates them about OCD. So they don't realize how these things pop up. That's why I have communities, because the more you're around other people, the more you learn. Even I learn. I am constantly learning from the AT parenting community because I'm hearing everyone's flavors of OCD and their struggles or their wins or the things that they're doing. And so I keep fresh with new ways of, oh wow, that's interesting how OCD showed up in that way. Even though I've had 2 decades um, of therapy work in my practice, my community still teaches me, and they learn from each other. I have a few parents who've gone back to school. I've had a few parents that actually are therapists and decide to pivot and specialize in OCD. And when they go to get extra training and stuff, they're like, I already know all this stuff because they've been in my community. So education is really important. But when you're either new to my community or you're new to this world in general, you might initially think, oh, my child is just really into healthy eating and they don't want to eat anything that's not quote unquote clean. Or my child's just really passionate about socioeconomic issues and that could be anything. It could be the environment, it could be politics, it could be religion, or it could be their religious beliefs that they need to follow the Bible very specifically or the Torah very specifically or whatever dogma they're following. They are more rigid than the most religious person in your faith. That's kind of how and and they take the rules and they make them so black and white that even the rabbi or the priest or the preacher would be like, no, we don't, that's not, we don't, it's not like that. So that can be confusing. And a lot of times that's how we figure out that they have moral OCD because it starts off with maybe this really passionate interest in their religion or in what is right for the world. Again, my son had a little flavor of this when he was about 7 or 8. It was the beginning of his ARFID, which is, I already told you, but it's avoidant restrictive food intake disorder. I have a whole podcast on that. You can find that. If I ever mention my podcast and you're like, where do I find that? You can actually go to my website at childocdtherapist.com. I changed my website URL, so it's super easy now. And there's a search button at the bottom, and you can type in ARFID, ARFID, and you'll find my podcast and all my other resources. I have a YouTube channel too, and I have pivoted my YouTube channel, and so now my YouTube channel is for you. I have thousands of videos for kids and teens, and so I wanted to pivot it and now do actual video for you. So if you like my podcast, you might really like my YouTube channel too, because I am literally acting out and role playing the things I'm teaching you, which might be pretty cool. So you can check out my YouTube channel as well at natashadaniels.com/YouTube. And then you can see me twice a week because I make those on Wednesday and you got me on Tuesday. So twice a week you can get some Natasha stuff. But when my son was having his initial issues with ARFID, it started with him saying, Mom, where does bacon come from? And then we're like, pigs. And then he's like, oh my gosh, there's a pig in heaven watching me eat it. Then it was like, where does beef come from? Went through the whole thing. It's a cow. Cow's watching me in heaven. And I just thought I have the kindest kid in the world. And he just really cares and he's going to be a vegetarian. And then it turned into like, are vegetables alive? Well, technically they were a plant. Then they're watching me in heaven and we're not religious. And so this was just out of the blue and it felt really bizarre. And I thought he's just super kind-hearted. And I was like, I'm fully ready for him to be a vegetarian. That's fine, or whatever he wants to be. But then he was like, I can't eat this Cheeto because it looks like it's alive. And I'm like, oh my gosh, we are definitely in the world of OCD. But and at the same time, he was having issues, worried he was going to give somebody the middle finger and he was holding his fingers down. And so his ARFID started with OCD. And now it's like full-blown ARFID where he feels like he's too full and he feels nauseous. And he used to have a fear of choking. Now it's like just literally his body just can't eat. Like he's 15, he's had ARFID for so long that he just can't even eat. But my whole point is it started off with actually a moral OCD flavor that was causing him to restrict his eating. Interesting. Okay, after the break, we're going to go through this list again, but instead of just telling you all the bad things we're all doing, I'm going to tell you what we can do to respond in a more effective way. Stay tuned. That's what's up next.
It's time we put help directly in our kids' hands. Introducing Crushing OCD course for kids and teens.
It was way more helpful than all the other therapy we've ever done because we didn't really know what to do. So we weren't really doing it before. So the course helped to figure out what the exposures are and how to do them.
We're not in therapy and find it really hard to find an ERP trained therapist here. So we're currently with like the public health service, but again, they don't seem to be trained in ERP. It's filled that gap that we don't have that was desperately needed.
this was really well timed for us to use between therapists and to help us get off to a good start with this new practice.
It was easy to use. I was able to do it from my phone or also on the computer.
There's different ages, so there were younger kids, there were teenagers, and so that was really nice too, to have a variety of ages where it wasn't just geared towards younger kids or older kids. It was a nice variety.
It's helpful for our kids to hear it from this third party as opposed to just us saying it.
I really like the offense and defense method. I love working on poking at OCD while it's sleeping. It makes it a little bit easier to do, and it's kind of fun. I'm planning on using it to work on my fear of holding or touching batteries and stuff like that.
So it was really helpful, and I think a lot of other kids would like it. I thought that I was the only one who had worrying about the weather and stuff. And then there was somebody else on there who worried about the same thing, which was really helpful.
Seems less scary to work on stuff now that I've watched this class, and I'm more interested to work on it.
I like trying to do more exposures still, and before I wasn't, I just didn't want to do them.
I've worked on some of my bigger compulsions and been successful.
I realized that it was helpful to do the exposures. Before it was really, really hard. It's still hard, but it's helpful to know that I need to do them.
Before there would be a lot of battles about it, so it is definitely less loggerheads.
Really, really good course and super helpful.
Definitely would recommend this. It's really easy to follow. It's nice bite-sized videos. I really like the worksheets that go along with it, and I think it's really helpful.
To learn more about this course and register your child or teen, go to atparentingsurvivalschool.com. Welcome back. Okay, so before the break, we went through 5 pitfalls that most parents make when they are trying to help their kids with moral OCD. And I want to go back through them and talk about ways that we can avoid these pitfalls. So the first one was thinking that our kids have good morals. They can have good morals. In fact, most kids with moral OCD actually do. I will say some kids are more on the spectrum and they see things in black and white because of their autism, and then they are kind of primed for moral OCD as well. But one of those things that you kind of want to separate out is it their autism or is it moral OCD? Because sometimes they're the moral police and they're policing everybody else about the rules and what's right and what's wrong. And sometimes that's just more of their autism, and sometimes it's both. But compulsions don't involve, managing other people's behavior and being the rule follower police. Normally it's about them and the intrusive thought that they might do something bad, or they are doing something bad, or they've done something bad. And sometimes those things that they ruminate about are things that they have done that are quote unquote bad. And they might lament over something that happened 4 years ago and argue, but it did happen. I did do it. Or they might have to confess every little thing they do, and they have done it. Now, something that you might want to be aware of is I've had a lot of kids in my practice confess things that they never did. And so sometimes OCD can convince them so much that they did those things that they feel like they did. I've had people convinced that they've cheated on a test, not even a doubt, but convinced. I had one kid once who told me that he unscrewed a bolt in his bus on the seat, the kids had seats. And one, it didn't make any sense because he said he did it with his hands. And I'm like, how do you unbolt something with your hands without a tool? But 2, when we really got into it, he had no memory of actually getting on the floor and doing it. He just felt like he did do it. And so there's a missing gap sometimes with what they're saying. So yes, sometimes it can be that they really did it, and sometimes they didn't do it. It's just something to be aware of. But you do want to separate out who is your child versus the rules that OCD is giving them. And there is an overlap. And so your child might care about being a nice, kind person, but them excessively apologizing 50,000 times an hour is not about your child being good or having good morals. It's about them doing compulsions. So learning to separate out what is OCD versus what is who my child really is, that's important. A lot of times, if they're driven by a fear and the need to do compulsions, then you know it's more of an OCD thing than just worrying about just wanting to be a good person. And it is hard to differentiate. The second thing that we talked about was the slippery slope of having real conversations versus talking to OCD. The first thing you can do that will really help is learn your child's themes, learn what flavors your child's moral OCD gets stuck on. What I've noticed with all the kids that I've worked with and from the thousands of parents in the AT parenting community is that moral OCD tends to have a playlist. And so some kids are really hyper fixated on worrying that they might be racist or worrying that they might be homophobic. You have kids who really worry about gossiping or lying. Lying's a big one, stealing, worrying about doing something blasphemous to God, for religious things. If they've got the environmental part, worrying that they're doing something that's bad for the environment. If they've got orthorexia, which is an OCD flavored eating disorder of eating clean, all natural, sometimes that's not driven by health, but it's driven by being a good person, wanting to be a good person, or being a vegetarian, because to not be vegetarian would be to ruin the planet, and to ruin the planet would mean they're a bad person. If they're a bad person, then no one's going to love them and they can't handle that. And so once you know their themes and their topics, when it pops up, even in a really natural setting, if you know they're really worried about lying, let's just take this as an example. Let's say one of their themes is, I'm going to lie, because a lot of times there's like 4 or 5 behaviors they're afraid they might have or they have had. Sometimes we have to include turning into a bad person, but when you look at that bad person, what do they represent? And sometimes it's they do drugs, or they drink, or they have piercings, or they have dyed hair, whatever it is, that's what their OCD says is bad. And so let's say I know my child is really worried about lying, and then they say to me, Mom, I was at school today, and the teacher said, I hope that you guys all looked over your work and studied so that you do well on this test today. And I didn't look over my work. I mean, I studied, but when she said look over my work, I don't think I opened up my book and looked over the work. And so I felt like I should raise my hand and tell her that I didn't look over my work because I don't want her to think that I'm lying. Okay, even though that's probably a real scenario that the teacher actually said that, and even though it sounds like you're having a normal conversation with your child and that you just need to help them recognize, oh no, I mean, you did look over your work. I saw you studying and you did study, so you weren't lying, right? That actually is growing OCD. You're giving them reassurance. But it sounds like a real conversation, right? But if I know one of my child's main themes is lying, and what is the theme about this story? That I might have lied to my teacher. Okay, so big red flags. And so once you start to notice it, you kind of can't unsee it. You see it in the conversations because they might come up to you about something else and they might say, hey, I got to tell you a funny story about my friend today. She came to school and we were eating lunch and then she pulled out this really weird thing and there's no theme in it. She's just telling you something. Or worrying about a friend and her friend is having a rough time at home and her dad is, being really mean to her, and what kind of advice can she give her friend? There's no content in there that has to do with the themes that are moral OCD related. We're not talking about lying, and I don't know what the other themes are. We're just creating a fake person, but I would know on that I'm in somewhat safe territory because I'm not seeing any themes. So start to pay attention to what does it sound like when you're talking to moral OCD? And you might miss it until you're halfway into the conversation because OCD is so slippery and sneaky that it has a slow roll. A lot of times with my daughter, with her sensory motor OCD, she would want to get reassurance that there would be a bathroom where we're going. But her OCD knew that if she just came right out and said, will there be a bathroom there? That I wouldn't answer because I would know that's her OCD. And I'd say, I'm not sure. I just wouldn't give her that definitive. And so instead, her OCD would come up with this great plan. And it would be like, So how long is the road trip? And then it'd be like, oh, 5 hours. Are we going to stop? Oh, when we stop, where are we going to stop? Oh, a road stop? Is there a gas station there? Is there food there? And she's looking for the bathroom. And so eventually I would be like, oh, you're asking for the bathroom. So you could be deep into a conversation and then have this epiphany. Oh my gosh, I'm talking to OCD. And that's okay. But as you learn those themes and topics, you have a conversation with your child. You educate them about moral OCD. Show them my YouTube videos on moral OCD. I'll link all those. I have tons of them. Well, I have a lot of them. Educate them on this is how OCD wants to be fed. OCD wants reassurance. It wants you to confess. And when I give you the reassurance and complete the OCD loop, OCD grows bigger. So when you're worried that you called me fat in your head and you tell me and you're looking for me to say, don't worry about it, honey, it's okay. Or even don't do that again. It doesn't matter. That's completing the loop. Or when you tell me you think you gossiped because you stood there and I say, no, you weren't gossiping, I'm completing OCD's loop. And OCD will never be satisfied. OCD will always want more and more and more. So the more you scratch that itch, the itchier it gets. And it's this revolving cycle that involves me. So from now on, this is the part where you pivot and you say, from now on, when I realize I'm talking to moral OCD, I'm going to say, I'm sorry OCD is bothering you right now. And tell OCD I'm not going to have a conversation with it. Now that may not go down well, and they might get really upset by that. And that is part of systematically pulling back our involvement with OCD without getting a high five or a pat on the back from our kids. We don't get acclimates from our kids that say, you're a great parent for not feeding my OCD. They get angry, but eventually it extinguishes and they stop turning to you for that. So that kind of merges into the third point that we had talked about, which is how to respond to confessions and not responding as if it's a real scenario. This can be hard. Now, the other issue that happens is there might be something that they're confessing that you do kind of want to circle back to. Maybe they're bringing up a question that you feel like as a child or teen, you do want to explore. Just put a pin in it and circle back at a different time, a different day. So you're giving some space from the thing that they were compulsing about. So let's say she was talking about gossiping. And this is really, you have to be really careful because when you start to talk to your child with moral OCD about right and wrong, OCD will glom onto that right away and it will be triggered and you can actually add more things to OCD's list of do nots and to-dos. So you want to skirt around the issue without being very black and white. And so let's say that instance of her worrying that she was standing there participating in gossiping. Maybe a few days afterwards, you circle back and you say, let's talk about being a useful friend, or what I love about you, right? You can talk about it in the positive. What I love about you is that you really like your friends and you really like to focus on the positives of what your friends do. And even though other people may not be as positive as you, or they might even complain or, talk about their friends, but you have your own view of your friends. I'm stumbling, but you see what I'm trying to avoid, like the good and the bad, the black and the white. And so my whole point is I don't want you to feel like you can't educate your kids, or because we're our kids' life teachers. We teach them about morals. We teach them about right and wrong. We teach them about these sticky situations where maybe they're around peers who are doing things that are bad and how do they navigate it. Just be careful with your language and being very black and white. But you can talk about those things and give it some space from the time where they were trying to get reassurance from you. Okay. But it does help to have a standard response to OCD when they are in that moment seeking that reassurance. And like I already said before, something like, I'm sorry your OCD is bothering you right now. I'm not going to talk to your OCD. Or I'm not going to grow your OCD. Is kind of the standard response. Now I want to talk about the next thing that we discussed, which is worrying that if you stop answering your child's OCD, they won't ever talk to you or trust you. You're not talking to your child. Let's just start with that. You're talking to OCD. And so that's number 1, 2, and 3. is you're not having this deep relationship with your child when you're talking to OCD. Your child's not saying they trust you when they're confessing to you about something and they want you to tell them it's okay. They're not processing, problem solving, or exploring it with you. They're literally compulsing. That's all they're doing. They don't care about the conversation. And so that's something that we do as parents is we put meaning on it. We see it without the distortion of the disorder, and we say, we're our child's go-to person. They're close to us. They can only tell me their confessions or their thoughts. That doesn't mean that your child's not close to you, but in that instance, that stuff is OCD. And so will they talk to you separate from that? Yeah. What we're trying to get them to see is that you're not going to talk to their OCD, which is good, actually. Part of what you can do that we already discussed before is really help them understand why you're not going to answer their OCD, and show them my YouTube videos on how reassurance grows their OCD, how confessions grow their OCD, what moral OCD is, even if you want to start there, so that when you're not talking to their OCD, they realize you're not talking to OCD. It doesn't mean you're not talking to them. The other thing, like I said before, is circle back and schedule time to touch in. It doesn't mean that you can't talk about their moral OCD ever. It just means that when OCD is wanting you to talk to it, it's not your child wanting that. But let's say on Saturday afternoon, I grab my child and I say, just want to talk to you about how your moral OCD is going. What are some themes that you're struggling with? That's not compulsing. I think I'm just making that word up, compulsing. I like it though. You are just touching base with their disorder. You're just seeing how they're doing. Now, if at that moment they want to go in and be like, well, I have a whole list of things I think I did wrong, you're not there to give them reassurance, but you can talk about what their themes are, what kind of intrusive thoughts they're getting. It doesn't mean that we don't talk about it. It just means that we're not providing that loop when OCD is looking for it. And you can schedule times to just touch base with them and talk to them. That's a good thing too, just so you have a mental time of when you're like, I'm going to reach out to them and check in and see how they're doing. The other complaint or fear, I should say, around not responding to OCD is that they're going to bottle it up and they're not going to get it out and they're going to be tortured by themselves. Well, there's a problem with that thought process. And the main problem is they're not getting it out when they're talking to you. They're doing a compulsion. It's like take their confessing or their reassurance looping with you and replace that with hand washing. And if a child was washing over and over and over again, and you limited the soap, would you be concerned that they're not being able to get it out or, get it off their chest? No, because you'd objectively see it as a concrete thing. They don't need more soap. They have already washed their hands. And so the extra soap is unnecessary. It's just growing their OCD. It's the same thing with moral OCD, except that it's so abstract that we miss it. And we think they're venting and they're getting it off their chest. They're not getting it off their chest. They're doing compulsion and they're getting reassurance and they're getting the loop to be completed. And so it is true that if they're not able to do that compulsion with you, they have to sit with the discomfort. And that is uncomfortable and overwhelming for our kids. And that's why sometimes parents don't go cold turkey. And I don't recommend that parents go cold turkey and pull back all of their OCD accommodations all at once. You slowly and systematically pull them back. Ellie Leibowitz out of Yale has a therapeutic approach called the space treatment approach. He wrote a book called Breaking Free of Childhood Anxiety and OCD. And I actually have a study course that I made. Actually, people in the AT parenting community asked me to make it because they wanted just simple videos and worksheets in my style explaining how to do the space approach, which is just systematically pulling back your involvement with OCD, which is a really important thing to do. And we don't do it all at once. If you want to check out that space study guide, you can go to natashadaniels.com/space and see what I'm talking about. But if we continue to be part of the OCD loop and don't remove ourselves, we're blocking our child from being able to make progress. We do have to get out of the way so that we're not part of the compulsion. And yes, they might find a new compulsion. They might mentally review and mentally check or mentally reassure. But until we get out of the way, we can't, we're like the outer layer of an onion, and we have to peel that layer off to get closer and closer to the core. And so the ultimate goal is for our kids to sit with discomfort, to sit with that anxious feeling and not scratch the itch. That is literally ultimately the goal, is going to the metaphorical OCD gym and lifting weights, being triggered and not being able to do anything about it except lift that heavy weight and handle the weight that it's bringing to that child. And so it's therapeutic. It's not about them not getting something off their chest and now walking around with it. It's them actually building resilience and crushing OCD. So, different way to look at it. Okay, the last thing I want to touch on that we brought up as a pitfall is confusing religious beliefs or ideology or rules or their quote unquote passions with OCD. And so, when it comes to religious beliefs, it can be helpful to talk to one of your religious leaders, whoever that might be for you, the priest or a rabbi or whoever, and have them go through the rules or the beliefs if it's being tainted by OCD. You do need to know who you're going to before you set your child up with this, because you might get the wrong person talking to your child. They might actually make OCD worse. There are two Instagram accounts that focus on faith and OCD that are both really good, and I'm going to link them in the show notes as well, so that you can, and I'll put them on my website. So if you go to my website at I forgot I changed my website. My new website is even easier. You're going to remember it forever. It's childocdtherapist.com. And if you want to if you're listening to this in a month, it may not be on like the main page of my website because I only have the last 3 things that I've done. This is podcast 435. Oh, actually, you know what? We don't do numbers anymore. Just search Moral OCD. And if you even type in the title, Moral OCD, Mistakes Parents Often Make, this episode will pop up, and then you will find the links to those Instagram accounts as well. But those are good to watch and have. Maybe if you have a teen or young adults, those would be really helpful for them as well. So the other thing is trying to help them separate out what is their belief in the environment or in clean eating versus what OCD is. Because the thing about OCD is no matter what, whether it's religious or environmental beliefs or passions, it will go above and beyond what is typical. So if people recycle, they will take it to the next level that even people who are very enthusiastic about recycling would not do. Or with religious beliefs, they will take something and they'll be over the top with the black and white version of it. Or clean eating. I have seen people with quote unquote clean eating who will go above and beyond what even the cleanest eater would do. And so you're looking for those extremes, and then you can kind of say, this is what it looks like to be environmentally friendly, and this is what it looks like to have OCD. This is what it looks like to clean eat, and this is what it looks like to have orthorexia. And so that can help. I actually do have a podcast, I believe, on orthorexia as well, and I will link a bunch of stuff today. I will link that as well. So I hope that you found that helpful. I hope that just gives you a better understanding, at least, of, the bumps of moral OCD and how to ride ungracefully through them, because it is tricky and it's not simple what I'm telling you. But I hope that this gave you some extra guidance at least. And I hope that you are enjoying my podcast. And if you are, don't forget to hit a star and rate them, because I really do appreciate that. And leave a review. I did find out that you can leave comments on Spotify. So if you are listening to this, I am checking them now. So if you leave a comment under this episode or any episode, I will see it and I will read it, because I like to show my gratitude by reading the things that you guys write, because I appreciate it. And I want to thank Cask76, who wrote, I'm extremely grateful for you sharing your wealth of knowledge and wisdom on the topics of OCD and anxiety, especially in such a relatable way. I found your website and took your online classes when my daughter transitioned to kindergarten with incredible difficulty, like a switch flipped. Because of your information, I was able to identify her causes, has since been diagnosed with OCD and anxiety, and has been working with a qualified therapist. While we still have our peaks and valleys, she's doing much better. I continue to use all of your resources to help us on our journey, and I've shared it with many of my parenting friends. Oh, well, thank you. I'm glad she's doing better. That's awesome. And that you found a qualified therapist, because sometimes those are gold when you find them. So I appreciating you taking the time out to write a review. And for those of you that haven't written a review, maybe I'll be reading yours next time. Don't forget to find the sparkle in everything you do. Check out my new YouTube channel that has pivoted towards parents. I have a playlist on how to find the core fear. I have a playlist on anxiety and OCD and how to respond differently. And I continue to make them. So check that out at natashadaniels.com/YouTube. And don't forget to find the sparkle in everything you do. I already think I said that. I'll talk to you next week. Take care.
Thank you for listening to the AT Parenting Survival Podcast. To get additional support raising a child with anxiety or OCD, visit Natasha's online school of on-demand classes at atparentingsurvivalschool.com.